All right, today we're putting American democracy on the hot seat. We're going to stress test its core design, that system of checks and balances that was put together over 200 years ago. So here's the big question. Can it actually handle the insane pressures of the 21st century?
This was the ultimate puzzle for America's founders. How do you build a government that's powerful enough to do its job, but not so powerful that it becomes a threat? It's this tricky balancing act, right? You need power, but power itself can be dangerous. Literally, their entire plan for a new government boiled down to solving this one thing.
So what was their answer? Well, they basically wrote an operating manual, the Constitution, and its whole purpose was to slice up and limit power. Let's dig into their three big ideas. Okay, first things first. They did not put all their eggs in one basket. They split the government's power into three separate branches. You've got the legislative branch, that's Congress, they write the laws. Then the executive, the president, who makes sure those laws are followed, and finally, the judicial branch, the courts, who get to decide if the laws are fair. But, and this is a big but, just splitting up the power wasn't enough.
Now here's where it gets really clever. They made these branches compete with each other. To stop any one part from getting too big for its britches, they gave each one the power to block or check the others. So think about it. The president can veto a law, but hey, Congress can turn around and override that veto. The courts, they can just say a law is unconstitutional and poof, it's gone. The whole thing is built to be this constant tug of war.
And just when you thought they were done, they added one more layer to this power-slicing cake, federalism. So power isn't just split up in Washington, D.C. Nope, it's also shared between the national government, your state government, and even your local government. And as we're about to see, that specific division, well, that's where some of the biggest fights are happening right now.
Okay, so that's the theory, that's the blueprint, but how does it actually hold up when things get real? Let's put it to the test. We're going to dive into some modern examples, and we'll start with some huge clashes over just how much power the president really has. Wow, just let that sink in for a second. That statement right there, it perfectly sums up the tension in our first stress test. A massive showdown over who really gets to call the shots on trade and taxes. Is it the president or is it Congress? And believe me, this was not just some academic debate. We are talking about 130 times billion dollars. That is a staggering amount of money. And it was all collected through tariffs using a law called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Now, this law gives the president a ton of power in a crisis, and using it this way kicked off an epic constitutional battle. Okay, so here's the play-by-play. President Trump said it was an emergency and slapped these huge tariffs on goods. But almost immediately, businesses and entire states said, whoa, not so fast, and they took him to court. Their argument was pretty simple. He'd gone way too far. And you know what? Two different lower courts actually agreed with them. That set the stage for a final showdown at the Supreme Court.
See? This is the system doing its thing. You've got the executive branch making a huge move. But, and this is key, the Constitution itself has a check for that. It says Congress is in charge of trade and taxes, so when they clash, who comes in to break it up? The judicial branch. The Supreme Court has to play referee and make the call. Did the president go out of bounds?
Wow. Now that is a headline that will make you stop and read. And it drops us right into our next stress test. One that stretches the president's power as commander-in-chief to the absolute breaking point.
Okay, let's just lay out the facts here, because they're pretty wild. President Trump ordered the military to capture the leader of another country, and he did it without telling Congress beforehand. His team said, yep, he can do that, he's the commander-in-chief. But a lot of people immediately cried foul, pointing to something called the War Powers Act. That's a law specifically meant to stop the president from going to war without Congress's okay. And Congress, they pushed back hard. The Senate even started moves to prevent anything like it from happening again.
So what you're seeing here is a classic constitutional tug-of-war. Yes, the president is the commander-in-chief of the military, but the biggest check on that power, the ultimate backstop, is that the Constitution says only Congress can declare war. That's their power. The War Powers Act is basically Congress's way of saying, hey, remember us. You can't just send troops into battle without our approval.
All right, let's shift gears a bit. For our next set of stress tests, we're moving away from just presidential power. We're going to look at some major clashes over the justice system and that huge ongoing battle between states and the federal government.
This quote, it's really different from the others, isn't it? It sets up a totally different kind of constitutional challenge. This one's deeply personal, and it's all about one of the most absolute, unchecked powers the president has. So here's the story.
After his son was convicted, President Biden used his power to issue a full pardon. But here's the thing. It wasn't just for that one crime. It was a sweeping blanket pardon that covered a whole decade and basically shut down any other investigations. This had literally never happened before. No president had ever pardoned their own kid. And on top of all that, he had previously promised he wouldn't do it.
Okay, so to be clear, the pardon power is legit. It's right there in the Constitution, a power of the executive branch. But the conflict here is, well, it's a bit different. When a president uses a pardon, they're basically bypassing the entire justice system, all the investigations, the trial, the verdict, everything. So what's the check on that power? It's not a law or a court. The check is us. It's public opinion, it's the media, it's the whole political world asking one simple question. Was that a fair use of power, or was it an abuse of power?
That phrase, "this is not over," that is pure defiance. And it perfectly sets up our final stress test, a head-on collision between a state and the federal government over one of the most contentious issues imaginable: who controls the border?
Now, to really get why this is such a flashpoint, you have to understand the sheer scale of what's happening. Just look at this number. Since January 2021, we're talking about more than 7.2 million encounters at the border. Now, that's not 7.2 million different people, some get counted more than once, but it gives you a sense of the immense pressure that's fueling this power struggle.
So here's how it went down. And it's a classic story of a power struggle. Texas said the federal government isn't doing its job, so they decided to handle it themselves, putting up all this razor wire. The Biden administration fired back with a lawsuit, saying, no, immigration is our job. The whole thing lands at the Supreme Court, which rules in a really close vote for the federal government. But even with that ruling from the highest court in the land, Texas basically said, yeah, we're not done.
I mean, if you looked up federalism under stress in a textbook, this would be the picture next to it. You have the federal government on one side saying this is a national issue, we're in charge. And on the other side, you have a state government saying this is our border, we have the right to defend it. It's a total clash. And once again, who steps into the ring to referee? The judicial branch. The Supreme Court has to draw the line, even if nobody agrees on where that line should be.
Okay, we've just walked through 4 incredibly intense situations: tariffs, military actions, presidential pardons, border showdowns. So now we've got to circle back to the biggest question of all. What's the final verdict? What does all this tell us about the system itself?
Well, you can really look at this in 2 completely different ways. On the one hand, you could say the system is working perfectly. I mean, it was designed for conflict. All this fighting and clashing is just proof that the checks and balances are doing their job, preventing any one person or group from getting total control. But on the other hand, you could argue the system is totally broken, that all this conflict just leads to gridlock where nothing gets done. It opens the door for abuses of power and stops the country from tackling huge problems. So which is it? Is all this friction a feature, or is it a bug?
And that brings us right back to where we started. But this time, the question is for you. You've seen the stress tests, you've seen how this 200-plus-year-old blueprint is dealing with modern-day problems. So what do you think? Did the founders get it right? Did they succeed in dividing and sharing power? Or has the world just changed too much for their design to keep up? It's a lot to think about. Thanks for watching.